Analysts expect South Africa's national budget will be passed following significant consultations among parties within the Government of National Unity. For more now, we cross to SABC News senior economics reporter Nompu Siziba, who's in Cape Town. Good afternoon, Nompu.
Thanks very much, Juliet. Well, of course, as you say, we are anticipating that budget 3.20 by Finance Minister Godongwana at 2 o'clock. The reason we're calling it budget 3.0 is because, of course, there have been three iterations, or at least two iterations of the budget. That was one in February, the usual time that one is expected to see the budget. But of course, that was not tabled because there was a big hoo-ha about the idea of a 2 percentage point increase in VAT. And so National Treasury had to go back to the drawing board. Despite a lot of contestation about a VAT increase, it still went ahead and came back in the second budget with the idea of a 1 percentage point increase in VAT in this particular fiscal year and the following one. That was very adamantly rejected by a number of political parties, especially the DA. And in the end, what happened was the DA went to court, supported by the EFF, to get rid of the whole issue of VAT, and as well as to reject or go back on the fiscal framework that was tabled. And what happened was that I think on the 23rd of April, the finance minister decided to basically withdraw everything and go back to the drawing board. And that was then confirmed by the court, which made a decision on a weekend on the 27th of April to say, no, you need to go back to the drawing board. And they said that procedurally things were not done properly. That framework, the fiscal framework that was actually approved in terms of budget 2.0 was supported by a very small minority. And so here we are calling it budget 3.0. And now the situation is that because they've taken VAT off the table, where are they going to raise the funds? Are they going to be looking to raise as much funds as they were before? That was 75 billion rand over the medium term. A lot of analysts are saying, well, you know, it's sensible for government to look at cutting. But of course, cutting is going to be problematic if they're cutting in the wrong places and in the places that require service delivery or an improvement therein. Well, to discuss further around the issues of tax and other matters, I am joined by Deborah Tickle. She's an independent tax expert with a lot of experience, having served on the Davis Tax Committee many years ago, which came up with comprehensive solutions around how to tax the South African economy. Deborah, thank you so much for joining us as usual. It's been a while since speaking to you last. But here we are. I've tried to give an overview as a layperson myself of what's happened with this budgetary process. Just give us your insights on how you've seen this budgetary process from February up until now.
Thank you, Nompu, and hello to everybody. Yes, it feels like Groundhog Day, and in February, as we saw, I thought about what Minister Godongwana and Treasury were trying to achieve, and they're almost like a family with a father who's got limited income, and he's got things to satisfy his children's health, their education, the infrastructure in the home, etc., etc. Those costs are there. And so what did he say? He looked around and he said, well, we've got at least 8 countries in Africa with 18% VAT. Let's increase the VAT rate. And of course, as you said, did not work. Came back again. What should we do? Well, we'll take away the bracket creep, which is the inflationary creep for individual tax. Now, the problem with that is that if one looks at the taxpayer base, and I keep on going on about this, it is a very limited base. Based on the 2024 statistics, which were based on 2023 tax returns, we have just over 1.3 million people earning or paying, having taxable income of more than 500,000 rand. Those people pay over 75% of the personal income tax. Now, if we put that in perspective, the personal income tax has increased since 23-24 to the 25-26 last iteration by 25%. Compare that to 6% just under for corporate income tax, and compare that to the VAT, which is just over 11%. So he's in a bit of a tight squeeze because he'd also looked around and said, well, what else could we do in previous years? He had the gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve fund, which they've already pulled on. There may be a bit more from there. And he'd also said to himself, in previous years, we've got the two-pot system. Well, he's used that up. So now we're at a stage where else does he look?
So where else can he look? I mean, he made commitments on the fuel levy that he didn't want to disturb that because he doesn't want to overburden South Africans because we're already bearing the higher cost of living. But is he going to have to renege on that? Is he going to have to renege on the public sector wage, which he agreed earlier this year? Where is he going to get more funding?
Well, those are two of the suggestions, and I've seen some really innovative suggestions. You may have also read in the papers about the customs union amounts that we pay to Namibia, Botswana, etc. And I saw that did come down a little bit in the 2.0 iteration, but maybe they're going to look at that. I saw something really interesting, which was suggesting excise duty on these cannabis shops, the sale of cannabis, which I thought, well, apparently they do it in Canada, and it's raised a significant amount of money. Then, obviously, as I mentioned, the Golden Exchange Reserve Fund, people have talked about maybe we should look to that again, but one has to be very careful with our foreign exchange reserves and not dig too far.
Deborah, we've got about a minute left. I want you to speak to the issue of wealth taxes because people keep on banging on about that.
Okay, so we saw Minister Godongwana tell us what happened in the tax return for 2023. 2,850 people with more than 50 million rands worth of assets. Not very many. It's that small number of people again. And we have to remember that the wealthy have been being taxed more and more in clever ways. So in structuring, there's more donations tax. The estate duty level of 3.5 million hasn't increased since 2007. If we compare that to overseas, in the US, it's around about, if we can put it in rand terms, it's around about 60 million rand before you pay any estate duty. In the UK, it's around 7 or 8 million rand before you pay any estate duty. So the wealthy are being taxed heavily, and again, it's that small pool. So to actually keep going back to that small pool, very dangerous. He's going to have to be very innovative and look at costs. If I've got a second, I could just mention the Auditor General's report, which said 402 or 406 billion rand over 5 years, 81 billion. It takes time to sort out the wasteful and irregular expenditure, but it's a place where they need to look a lot more carefully going forward. And then, of course, policies that grow the country. Our growth is pedestrian. We've only had, well, below 1%, and everywhere else seems to be higher, and we need more employment. We need less poverty and more employment, and then we'll have more tax. We don't need to worry then.
Indeed, indeed. And of course, to Deborah's point, if we have more people employed in the economy, there are more people to actually pay taxes towards the fiscus so that we can get all those lovely things that we need in terms of service delivery. And of course, she was touching on the point that wealthy people are highly taxed already, and the difficulty with imposing further taxes on wealthy people is that they do have the resources to employ tax analysts and experts who can enable them to avoid tax legally, and then of course the purpose will be defeated. So it's a tricky one. We're going to go for a quick break, and of course we continue with our rolling coverage.